From the College by the Lake, Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Local, regional, national, and international guests discussing the issues and topics affecting the way you live are on Forum, the North Idaho College Public Forum, with your host and moderator, political scientist, Tony Stewart.
We are most pleased to bring you the topic today, high technology. We want to look at such issues as computer hardware, software, internet services. As all of you are so cognizant of the fact we are in the high-tech age, and we also talk about such things as the information highway. And we're very pleased to have on our program today a gentleman who is highly qualified to discuss this important topic. I welcome to the program Tony Paquin. He is the president of Agency One Corporation located in Idaho. He also is the president of the Idaho Technical Association, a new organization that is just coming into a realization here in this state, and he had the experience of creating a similar association in the state of Arizona. Mr. Paquin, it's a great pleasure to have you on the program, and thank you for taking time. You're a busy man to discuss really the future with us in dealing with technology.
Thank you, Tony. My pleasure.
And I'm so pleased, as always, to have our regular panelist, Janelle Burke, who's an attorney in the state of Idaho. And Janelle, she'll start the question today with our guest, Tony Paquin.
It's a pleasure to have you here to talk about this fascinating subject. For the benefit of our viewers, let's set the parameters somewhat. And what exactly do we mean when we talk about technology?
Well, today, Janelle, it's really beginning to merge a lot of different technologies together. If we were having this discussion 5 or 10 years ago, we may have talked about computers. But today, we're really talking about telephone technology, computer technology, and the internet software technology, and really television is merging in with that as well.
So it's going to be a whole combination of things that are going to come together. Can you give us an example of how the telephone and television might come together?
Well, for example, a couple things that we see happening in the area of television, for example, would be interactive TV or on-demand TV. The idea now is people who want to watch this program have to tune in at the scheduled time to watch it. But we really expect the day will come where they'll be able to sort of log into their computer and tell it, I want to watch this program when I get home in the evening on a weeknight. And it will retrieve the program at that time and display it for them.
Do you think there'll be some ability to talk with other people and see them that are quite a distance away?
Sure. You know, video conferencing, as we know it today, which is occasionally used in business, will probably become very common in the home. And you know, we've seen a little bit of technology in the way of video telephones. Well, video telephones will really become a function of what we view today as our TV. Our TV will be tied to our computer. It'll be like the display of our computer. So if we're browsing on the internet, it may very well be on our TV. And then very possibly it will hook to our telephone and be used as a conferencing, video conferencing, or video telephone type of piece of technology.
So, Tony, you're indicating to us that the whole world is changing, and that leads me to a number of questions. We also want to talk some about your association and what's happening in the industry, but to follow up on Janelle's question, are we with this technology tying the whole world together that you can live in the most rural area if you choose and still be in the same situation if you were in a major urban center as far as communication is concerned?
Well, you know, that is a big part of what's happening, and that's why we're seeing a lot of growth that we see here in Idaho, particularly North Idaho. Because of the technology now, people can move to where they view there's the highest quality of life, like there is in the beautiful area of North Idaho, but yet they may still do business all over the country or even all over the world. And they're using these new technologies, the internet, video conferencing, telephone conferencing, email, to accomplish that.
So there are many different sources of how you do that. I have some friends who are now using the internet, and they also have it tied to cameras, and they're talking to people in Japan and England, wherever, and faster than a phone, actually, where they're actually seeing the other person they're talking to. So is this shrinking the world into a tiny planet?
Yeah, one of the side effects of this whole process is it's creating a global community. That's a very unusual thing. You know, you can be sitting here in your home and you can connect to people in Germany, Japan. An interesting statistic is the fastest growing areas of the internet are actually outside of North America. The Russian Federation states, Japan, Singapore, Thailand. these countries are actually the fastest growing internet countries right now. So the internet is a worldwide phenomenon, and something that's taking place that is allowing us now to connect globally with people that we really never we wouldn't have considered it even just 5 years ago.
That brings up some other issues that I want to come back to later concerning laws and deregulation and all that. But I want to move back to, because I feel guilty if I got through the program and didn't deal with some of the things that you're involved in. This is really impacting the economy all over the world too. And I know if we can become less global for a minute and look at Idaho, your association has the potential of bringing together, and I'm going to let you provide the statistics, a rather large sum of money that's involved, and companies. Would you tell us just in Idaho in these last few years what this has done with these, we're not talking about the major corporations, but small companies that...
Right. That's the interesting thing about technology companies, is they're frequently relatively small. It's not at all unusual to have a 5-employee, multi-million-dollar technology company. Idaho, as it turns out, has quite a few. We believe about 1,000 small technology companies exist here in Idaho.
Can I interrupt you to say,
Sure.
and that's in a state with a population a little over 1 million.
That's right. In a relatively small state, we have a relatively large technology business population. What the association is attempting to do is get some definition to that, because they're here, but we really don't know where they are or what they do. They're all over the state. Because again, as we mentioned earlier, due to the technology, they can live in the smaller towns out in the mountains and the hills, enjoy the quality of life, but still operate their technology company.
And they may not be registered with the Chamber of Commerce and others, and they're hard to find.
That's right, exactly. When we started the association, we contacted the Idaho Department of Commerce and said we'd like to get a list of high-tech companies. And they really weren't able to give us a very complete list, because something like our association had never existed before. So as we began to get some publicity and hold some meetings, the calls start to come in. And we're just constantly amazed at the calls that I get from small technology companies, medium-sized technology companies, really all over the state.
Now, give us the other figures about how much money we're talking about, that's gross funds per
This
year
is
and employees.
Yeah, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry, certainly. We believe, and there's been some studies done that suggest that technology is really becoming the largest economic center within the state, for example, if you begin to include people like Micron and Hewlett-Packard. But clearly, even just the small companies, there's probably $1 billion in revenue type of numbers. 1,000 companies. Average salaries are probably $40,000 or more. So these are very significant dollars to Idaho.
Let me take it one step further before I go back to Janelle. Also, in addition to what you've given here for Idaho, obviously those kind of statistics would be available to indicate the economic impact in other parts of the United States. But I also understand from some comments you've made in other interviews that some states are more inclined to have this particular economic base than others. Would you address that question?
Yeah. Clearly,
and why that's true?
There's a trend taking place in the United States right now where many states are growing in this area. The technology companies are new, they're prosperous, and they're also fairly mobile. It's not that difficult to move them because they tend to be small. So these companies are moving, and what they're doing is they're moving out of the old commerce centers, the old cities back east, and they're really moving west. The western states are doing very well. Colorado, Utah, Idaho are doing very well, and Idaho is definitely one of those leading states. So it's mainly driven by the quality of life issue. They have these small businesses, they're doing well, they go, listen, I can operate this business anywhere in the country. Well, gee, I might as well go somewhere where the quality of life is nice. So they move to Idaho, is what happens.
Janelle, I can't resist that. Just one more thing that Tony has made me think about. So when you talked about large companies in the industrial age, they had to worry about transportation.
That's right.
Shipping or trucks and all that.
That's
eliminated with this.
They had to worry about water. They had to worry about electrical power. General Motors located in Michigan because you had the Great Lakes. You had sources of water, power, and railways. But to this new industry, which is really the leading industry of the 21st century, those things are immaterial. And so the industry has become very mobile, and it has begun to move out of those historic centers and move into new locations, which is really the West. The West is really the dominant force in the technology world.
Thank you. Janelle?
I'm going to follow up on your question, Tony, and talk just a little bit more about what kinds of companies are these. Can you give us a couple of examples? I would assume that each company picks out a small area, then they concentrate on that area, or they have a specialty that they're working toward. Can you give us a couple of examples of companies and what they do?
Yeah, it's interesting, Janelle. You're exactly right. They do tend to pick out small niches and then develop along those lines. My company, for example, produces software which we sell to independent insurance agencies. So there's a little niche that we service. There's a company in Boise that develops software that services the forestry industry. I know of a company that used to be headquartered in Coeur d'Alene. They recently moved, but they develop software that's used in the agricultural industry. It's for precision farming. So it tends to be that somebody understands an area, they develop a specialty, and they develop some technology used in that little niche market, and it grows into frequently a multi-million-dollar business.
That's very interesting. As we go along, one of the things, too, that I'm very interested in is, let's say, the commerce area. How is the Internet now affecting commerce? And you don't need to necessarily limit yourself to the Internet, but how is commerce affected by this new high tech?
Yeah, commerce is the big issue. When you talk about the Internet, is commerce occurring over the Internet, or is commerce being indirectly impacted by the Internet? And obviously it is in many different ways. Commerce on the Internet being a network of networks, computers hooked together all over the world. The idea will be that shopping or some purchases that maybe we do now through catalogs, we will someday do over the Internet. But remember, we're talking about the Internet being that merging of our computer, our telephone, and our TV. So it will be some sort of comfortable home experience. That will occur, but really isn't happening in great volume today. It just hasn't happened yet. We expect it. There's a little bit of action there. There is maybe $1 billion a year of traffic occurring over the Internet, but that's relatively small, and it's mostly indirect revenues, things like advertising, for example.
Okay, so when you buy your airline tickets over the Internet, for example,
that's correct.
That would be one of the areas
would be one way. That's right.
Of commerce, and that we probably will see a whole lot more of in the future. Is that correct?
Yeah, we're going to see a lot of business purchases, office supplies ordering, computer equipment ordering, parts supplies, things of that nature. We know where you already have a relationship with a company. Those types of orders will first occur on the Internet. What the Internet is really all about is information. So, for example, we talked about on-demand TV, on-demand video will occur on the Internet. The selling of information, content is king, is the phrase that's frequently used on the Internet. It's the content.
So if you want to do research on a subject, or the kids want to write a research paper, they can plug in and get some information.
But that information's free, and there's the Internet is a community. It's an electronic community of people. So it has its own culture, much like any other community has. And the Internet culture tends to be somewhat libertarian, you could say. So there's this resistance to too much legislation or too much charging of things that historically had been free. Information being one of those things, or public information, like research. Remember, the Internet started as a government activity, part of the federal government, really a military undertaking, but then quickly became part of educational institutions. It was really part of the university system. So there's a history there, a tradition of free information that will be with us, I think, for a long, long time.
So, Tony, you keep bringing thoughts to my mind, and one of those is that from a political perspective, there was a time when countries could be isolated in their foreign policy. That's gone, isn't it? The world's tied together.
We remember back when there was the upheaval in Poland, and the communist regime fell there. And a big part of what was involved was fax machines, an early form of technology, because they couldn't keep out the information. They couldn't isolate themselves. See, many regimes protected themselves based upon the idea of isolation. They could control what information people got. The Internet is just making that virtually impossible now. We have this free flow of information that is breaking down those walls, definitely.
There's so many things to do, and we're jumping back and forth, but I want to talk about something technical again.
Yeah.
A lot of our viewers have not had the expertise that you have or they don't have, and we hear about fiber technology and
Right.
Digital technology. Would you bring some of our viewers up to speed on what does that mean? You've talked today about the telephone and television, what happened, but explain how that's different from the system we've been used to.
Yeah. The big change that really is going to occur in the area of fiber optics, for example, you mentioned fiber. The big change that really is going to occur is on the telephone side of this equation. The TVs are there. They work as monitors. The computers just rapidly always progress. They get faster and cheaper. There's a thing called the Moore's Law in computer technology, which states that every 18 months the speed of a computer will double, and the cost will remain the same. Well, if you work, the law of exponential growth, that becomes very fast, very quickly, and that's what we're experiencing now, is that we're in the later days of that exponential growth. The restricting factor, however, is what we refer to as the pipeline, the pipes they call them, and that's the telephone wires that all of this information is flowing through. If you've ever had experience on the internet, you might go, well, this is awfully slow. And people don't like that. So it's going to speed up, and fiber optic telephone lines is a very big way that will happen.
In relation to that, too, one other question before we go back to Janelle. You had mentioned as we're advancing all these areas and all this information is available and is free and the information highway, yet government is looking at the possibility in some situations of illegal activity or abuses.
Yes.
And so what you see down the road in two things at once, in some restriction by law and also, however, the movement in the other direction where Congress and the President has enacted legislation for deregulation of telecommunications.
Yes.
Are we going to do some of both at the same time?
There's a lot of new questions to be worked out. Another one will be copyrights and patents, because as you move information over the internet, they become big issues. Some of the other legal issues are if somebody puts information up in Ohio that is illegal and it's used in Idaho, what law applies and how do you enforce those laws, and what if they were state laws? The crossing of state boundaries and international boundaries is a real new issue that has to be resolved from a legislation standpoint. So there's kind of movement in both directions. The high-tech industry flourished by not being regulated, so it has a real resistance to regulation as an industry, and that will continue. But yet there are other issues that are more impacting society, more social type issues that are new that we're going to have to deal with. Patents and copyrights are another big issue, because today, for example, you might say that you could buy a book, and I could buy that book for $10, and once I read it, I can pass it on to somebody else. But in the future, you may download a version of that book that you can read one time, and you may pay 20 cents for it. But then who really owns the copyright, and what opportunity do you have to copy that? There's going to be new rules relating to the protection of intellectual property. Will be some of the big questions that we're going to have to deal with.
Janelle Burke.
I want to ask a series of questions that I think people might be interested in, just because of the kinds of things that we all wonder about. The first one is, what about, is everyone going to have this access? Or is it going to be too expensive for some people? What do you think is going to happen? Is everyone going to have this? I
think in the United States, access will be virtually universal, much as, say, telephones or televisions are today. The cost really even today isn't that high. You can get unlimited internet access for $20 a month. But I think you're going to find that virtually, if we look, we've got to look down the road 10, 20 years now. Let's talk 15, 20 years down the road. These technologies will be very commonplace. They'll be in every home.
What about if I don't know how to use it and I feel frustrated? What's going to happen?
Well, I think that
somebody going to walk me through this?
Yeah, those are issues, and you could compare it to the early ages, technology ages of 50 years ago when we first got telephones or we first got televisions. They were new technologies, and even radio. And over time, everybody became very accustomed to them. I think the same thing will occur, but the technologies will also get easier to use. We're really beginning to see some first movement in that direction now. It used to be that computing was about computers. Today, computing is about living. It's moving from the technology people to the entire population. everybody is involved with technology, really. 5-10 years ago, it was technology people. Today, it's every business, students, teachers, it's really everywhere.
Is this going to put a lot of people out of work?
No, it's very positive for the economy. The economy grows as a result of it. It's freer trade and faster trade. I don't think it'll have any negative impact whatsoever. It'll be a positive thing.
So what you're saying, it's going to be a shift in what people do today and how they do it.
Right.
In the future.
You look at other big changes in the world over the last 100 years, the interstate freeway system, the global telephone system, the television, the radio, all of those things positively impacted the economy permanently. And I think you'll see the same result.
Well, it's happening very rapidly.
Yes.
If you were to give some kind of a timeline from the time that computers first started, is this an exponential kind of growth?
That's the key thing. I give talks on this subject quite a bit, and I talk to people about 1972. There were less than 500,000 computers in the world. Next year, Intel alone expects to ship 100 million computers. Just Intel, just in 1 year. And it's the exponential growth aspect of that. And we're in the later days of that exponential growth. The internet, for example, grows at the rate of 10% a month. At the rate it's growing, every human on the planet would be on it by the year 2004. Well, obviously that's not going to occur. But it illustrates that we're in the later days of that exponential growth. It is projected, though, that 1 billion people will have access and be on the internet by the year 2000, which is just 2 years away.
What's going to happen to me if I resist this movement?
Well, I think you're gonna regret resisting the movement. It's
Am I
inevitable.
going to get left behind?
Well, I think it's inevitable, and really what it delivers is a higher quality of life. And I think you're just going to naturally choose that higher quality life that goes with it. So I don't think you're going to really find people resisting. We saw a movement about 10 years ago talking about home computers. If you remember, Apple was talking about a computer in every home, and IBM was talking about it. It never really happened because there really wasn't a reason to have a computer in your home. But today, there's getting to be good reason to have a computer in every home. And in fact, we see the statistics that suggest that is absolutely occurring.
I guess I would call this the grapevine method that Janelle's talking about. I think, Tony, that I hear you saying that as it becomes so helpful and useful that individuals in their excitement will teach other individuals, and
Yes.
just in the general population, people become teachers to show how to do this. Another thing that we talked about before we went on the air, this has all been very positive, but let me kind of switch to a concern that happens. I have talked to a number of people as organizations become much, much larger, and they put this system online, and you call for assistance about financial matters or mortgages, whatever it may be. You get transferred from one number to another, one recording to another one. What is your advice to companies, although they need to use this to expedite some of the process? How can we still be very humane in the sense that people oftentimes have to talk to a person to resolve their questions and their problems?
It's the human experience. To use technology, you have to protect the human experience. In the days I used to consult, I used to always caution people against over-automating. Use the technology properly, but don't overuse it, because you can get that way. You can lose the human experience. One of the examples we talk about, back to the internet shopping idea, is that you may go out over the internet someday and purchase a bar of soap or some utilitarian thing that you might need in your household. But shopping itself is still a social experience. People get together and go to the mall and go window shopping. That experience will continue. See, so you have to protect the human experience part of this. So as an example, talking about automated telephone systems, and what we discussed was, in my case, whenever you call our office, you always have the ability to hit a key, get a live operator. People want to continue the live experience. And there's been discussions that, well, is the computer age going to end up isolating everybody? Well, they're all going to sit in their home and just interact over the telephone lines. That's not going to happen. It's against human nature. It won't happen.
Also, one could add that there are some problems you have that a recording could not solve.
Yes.
So you have to talk to a human.
That's right.
Another issue that we also dealt with prior to the program, and that has to do with security, and you had some really important comments to make. How much must we be concerned about invasion of privacy by people being able to come through the system and actually even financial security of rating people's funds and so forth.
The internet opens up a whole new set of opportunities of security type issues. To give you an idea, the Department of Defense computers were invaded 30,000 times last year over the internet. So, you know, where you have 1 billion people all on the same network, interesting things can happen. But there are very clear ways to protect against this. I mean, if, you know, banks, for example, take extraordinary measures to physically isolate themselves from these situations. I have online banking with one of the banks here. It works wonderful. I really like it. It's good technology. But I don't have access to their computers. They'll have separate computers. You really can't get into the bank's computer. You get into a computer that stores the information that you need, a separate system. So there are protections that can be taken. But overall, the internet is a very secure thing. It's actually much more secure, for example, than telephones. We talked about credit card transactions over the internet. And they're working on technologies now which will encrypt that credit card on both ends of the transaction. But even without that, today, it's a far more secure event than getting on the telephone and giving somebody your credit card number.
Janelle, we have less than 2 minutes.
Well, we have a very short time, but can you give us your vision of what the home of the 21st century is going to look like?
Yeah. There's going to be some very interesting things that will take place. I think video conferencing will be extremely commonplace. The other big technology that we see, that we refer to it as intelligent agents. It'll be your computer will learn what you do. It will learn what you buy because you'll buy everything through it. So it will monitor this worldwide network of information and retrieve information that's suitable to you. It could, for example, scan every newspaper in the country and pull the articles that it knows that you're interested in. And it's going to learn that as a result of the processes, of the result of the experiences that you have with it. So intelligent agents working with your computer, your television, your telephone will all come together.
Are we done?
One more question.
I can have a short time yet? Okay, so I can also control the climate. I can control the climate in my home.
Right. Yeah, the climate, the alarm system. Bill Gates built the real state-of-the-art home over in Seattle that when you actually walk into a room, you're carrying a little device in your lapel. It senses who you are. It adjusts the music to the type of music you like. It adjusts the temperature to the temperature you prefer.
On that note, we have to bring to conclusion. Tony Paquin, thank you for being with us on this exciting topic of high technology, and we hope to have you back sometime to finish. We just got started.
My pleasure.
Ladies and gentlemen, our guest has been Tony Paquin of Agency 1 and the Idaho Technical Association. I'd like to invite you to be with us again next week when we will discuss yet another issue. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
The North Idaho College Public Forum was videotaped live from the studios of Instructional Technology on the campus of North Idaho College for viewing at this more appropriate time. We invite you to join us again next week for another all-new edition of the North Idaho College Public Forum on this public television station.